Welcome to the MBA series. This is a special multi-part series within Next Economy Now. We are going to review the arc of the learning journey that is presented in the Next Economy MBA online course. We are open sourcing the content from our course and hope to share it in this shorter, bite-sized format. We are launching this series because we were asked to do it by listeners like you. We're also doing it because we are writing a book entitled The Next Economy MBA, Redesigning Business for the Benefit of All Life, which will be published on May 23rd, 2023 by Barrett Kohler Publishers. This is a sizable series. There will eventually be 18 podcast episodes of course content and 9 interviews with MBA alumni. We will be rotating every other week with our normal Next Economy Now interview format. We hope you enjoy it. Please reach out to us via our website, lifteconomy.com, with any comments, feedback, or requests. And now, on with the show.
Hello, I'm Kevin Bayuk, a partner and worker owner at Lift Economy. My guest today is Paul Zelizer. Paul is a social entrepreneur coach and executive coach for impact leaders. He's also the creator and producer of the Awarepreneurs podcast, which started back, I think, 2018. Paul's been director of social media for Wisdom 2.0, and for a number of years was the executive director of a men's resource center in Taos, New Mexico. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. You guys do such great work. It's such an honor to be here.
Our pleasure to have you here, and I'm glad we get to chat. Maybe just to start, maybe you could tell the Next Economy Now listeners about your story. Kind of how did you get into what you are doing today?
Yeah, so we were chatting a little before we hit record, Kevin. So I had a 15-year career in community mental health and nonprofits, working in innovative approaches to really tough problems, whether that was domestic violence or engaging young men as fathers, helping families with young people whose kids were starting to get court involved. And most of that was here in northern New Mexico. Many of your listeners don't know about New Mexico. I don't like this language, but that's the way people talk about it. We're the first majority minority state. In other words, because of our very high Latinx population and the second highest population of Native Americans or indigenous folks in the U.S., only Alaska has a higher percentage. So when you put all that together, we have a higher proportion of folks of color here in New Mexico than any other state. So we look like the future. And it was incredible work. Oftentimes I was the person with a degree of a master's in community mental health. And I was interfacing with I was like the go-between representative of the communities who were trying to figure out, talk to school districts and court systems and other folks who were making big decisions that are affecting families and communities, and oftentimes sending kids from tribes to treatment programs 3 states away and not really using all the resources that were local because some of those were informal. So I was that person who was willing to broker some of those conversations between a judge and a 15-year-old in trouble, and how the family was doing wraparound care with informal resources using a spiritual elder or a teacher who loved them at school, restorative practices and things like that. It was incredible work. I learned so much. And after 15, I burned out after about 11 or 12 years, like really bad, really bad. Took me a few years to figure out what to do about that. But I figured out I wanted to keep doing the work of helping people, Kevin, but I had to have a more direct relationship with the resources to do the work. At that time, I had become the director of a nonprofit working on helping young men and ending men's violence, and trying to both do the work and oversee the work and get the resources for the work was just burnout city. So 16 years ago, I said, I got to get into, we didn't even know what to call it back then. Some people called it conscious business. Some people called it conscious capitalism. Some people called it social entrepreneurship. Some people called it social enterprise. Some people called it business for good. There wasn't really so much agreement, but there were a smaller group of us than there are today started to find each other. I got on Twitter in 2008, and we started a conversation and I joined that conversation, and that has taken me global for 16 years now. Now I know it's called social entrepreneurship, but I've been in that space for 16 years now. It's been a really powerful ride.
Well, thanks for sensing in yourself the need for a shift and then doing a diligent search and finding this place of passion and interest and helping develop the community of people who are using enterprise for better outcomes for people and for planet and committing their life energy to that. I really appreciate you making those moves. I'm curious, Paul, having talked to hundreds, maybe even thousands of social entrepreneurs and impact leaders, and then with the hundreds of podcast episodes on awarepreneurs, what are some of the key learnings that you've developed or gleaned from all of those amazing conversations that you've had?
A great question, Kevin. So a couple things I'd say. One is in 2023, one of the things that's exciting is we're further along as a space. The idea that you can harness the engine of business and enterprise to make positive impact is not like it was pretty, it was a small group of us. We were pretty fringe, right? In a good way. But go back 16 years, it was not as a robust a conversation. So one of the things that I've really learned and feel grateful to have seen happen is that the business acumen in the space is much higher than it was 16 years ago. We're attracting more people who have real chops in their craft, in addition to a high level, I want to make the planet or I want to make the communities I care about a better place, which has always been true. But there's more skillfulness about what that looks like. Everything from how we measure impact to the kind of things that are possible. I remember when I had the honor to interview Kirsten Toby of Revolution Foods, right? Incredible work. They have 1,000 employees and they have 16 regional centers. They're serving hundreds of millions of mostly organic food to kids, a lot of young people who are, living in places where quality food and affordable food isn't something you can necessarily count on. And here's a social enterprise that's also been going somewhere around 16, 17 years that's figured some things out. So we have some reference points and some people who've cracked the code about how to do things at scale that, like I said, back in the day, we dreamed it was possible. We had a few examples, but nowhere near as many now. So I'm really excited to see how things have developed. And I think it's an incredible time. It's still early enough that there's a lot of opportunity, but you're not so early that people look at you blankly when you start to talk about it. Like my accountant dad, I love my dad. He knows what I do now, but he was an accountant in very traditional businesses and didn't understand what we were talking about then. And now even he has seen articles and things get shared around. And there's just a lot more, the zeitgeist of the culture has shifted. And that's really exciting. Wherever you are in your career, you can bring what you have and find incredible folks who will assess where you are, help skill you up, and let's get you to work because our planet needs us.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for those reflections and learnings. And you've been part of that communication, right? And then that the culture at large, that people who are born into business as usual economy, capitalism, aren't aware of, our friends call it a crisis of the imagination, aren't aware of what's possible. And so they get stuck in the patterns of business as usual. How do I maybe get a credential or a degree, get a job, make as much money as I can, save as much as I can, invest it if possible, and try and make it to retirement and I guess die with money or something like that. Whatever the business as usual narrative is, which doesn't work for everybody, certainly is not accessible to everybody, kind of the fatuous promise that is out there. But nonetheless, there's an attachment to it if that's all you know. If that's the only strategies that are accessible to you, when somebody comes along and say, hey, why don't we try and take resources and actually not try and make a profit. Let's try and distribute those to the community or to the workers and actually meet our needs for the community reliably without having to accrete wealth or make money off money through capital. How do you talk to people to bridge that gap? So if you're talking to somebody who's kind of stuck in business as usual mentality, maybe an accountant or, or somebody who comes from that world, what kind of phrases do you use, or do you use certain examples? How do you communicate about it?
Yeah. And again, this is part of the culture shift that we've seen. So I'm a really granular person. Matter of fact, we have a small group of podcasters who impact podcasters that I mentor to help them grow their podcast. And they tease me about how many times are we going to use the word granular today, Paul? Right. So I'm really granular, Kevin. So you look at the research, social entrepreneurship and associated, impact investing. Those are some of the fastest growing majors on college campuses around the planet. So if somebody's stuck and they're in business, I just ask them a simple question. Do you want to stay in two simple questions? Number one, do you want to have customers or clients who are under the age of 35? And number two, do you want to stay in business? This is one of the fastest growing trends on the planet. If you do not pay attention to this, where do you think your business is going? Where do you think it's going to be in even 2 years? This has grown incredibly fast, right? 5 years, 10 years. Do you want to be able to earn a living? Because if you do, this is one of the fastest growing trends on the planet. And we all know what happens to people who don't pay attention to when markets shift. So that oftentimes will give it, tell me more. Somebody who didn't necessarily want to have a conversation suddenly will be like, well, what do you know about that? Yes, I would like to still be in business. Yes, I would still like to be seen as somebody who's relevant in the conversation in my space. And maybe there's something I didn't know. And again, there's lots of information and data about all that. But the younger your ideal client or customer is, the more these kinds of issues are not just a little bit of an issue for them, but the younger you go, the higher the hunger, the appetite is to work for. You want to attract talent. That's another great question to get somebody's attention. Do you want to attract and retain talent? Because we've seen the research when there's a sense of meaning and a sense of like purpose and relationship to some of the hard issues that humans on planet Earth are facing. The businesses that are ignoring them are the same ones that are experiencing a lot of churn and are really struggling to attract talent and kind of get stuck in a bidding war for talent. Whereas, for instance, I'm part of a very large network called Work on Climate. And there's tens of thousands, I don't even remember how many, but there's a Slack group. And you see in that group, very experienced. It's particularly a community. There's a lot of tech skilled people who come to that community who could work, a lot of them almost anywhere they want to go, but they're coming to that community looking to join the climate tech revolution. And many of them are willing to take a pay cut to use their skills in the efforts. They're looking around the world and saying, wow, things are kind of on fire and I want to make a difference. And that experience of really talented people who have all kinds of acumen in their chosen craft, being willing to not necessarily only go for the metric of how much they're getting paid, but does my work matter? Again, every year that goes by, that conversation just keeps getting more and more and more powerful. So whether it's your profitability and sustainability as a company, your talent, your sense of engagement. We know that there's a crisis of engagement from the Gallup polls about, look it up, do a search on Google, the Gallup research on disengagement in the workplace. It's very, very high. But in the kinds of companies that you and I feature and work with and amplify in our podcast, Kevin, engagement is much higher than what you see in a company that doesn't have these issues somewhere in the forefront of their brand. So on all these different levels, and even smart people who maybe necessarily weren't thinking about these kind of impact issues, when you start to give them data like that and the difference between how companies perform, how easily they attract talent, how they retain people, the innovation that happens in these companies because their workers are engaged, you can get the attention of somebody who didn't have this on their radar. That's how I go about it.
Fascinating. I'm learning. This is great. So what I heard there, just reflecting, is you could kind of take their reasoning of like, I want a company that wants to live into the future and sustain. I want a company that's profitable. And so if they're stuck in their kind of business as usual mentality, and that's what they were born into, those are the strategies they know. Yeah, I want talented people. Yes, I want people to be engaged because that makes me more productive, more profit, and all the things that are in their kind of standard line of sight. And you're saying you want those things. Well, now you got to pay attention, and you have data and substance to animate their motivated reasoning to pursue what they want. But it's like, actually, I have to pay attention to these things.
Exactly.
So the one risk I could imagine there, and it's not that you stop there. I imagine there's the conversation deepens once you have their attention. But the risk, of course, is that that person could then potentially look to tokenize, or what's the minimum I could do to like be perceived as doing that, so that
Sure.
I can continue on that status quo. But I imagine you take it further. I'm curious if there's other pieces that you then start to weave in there.
Yeah, let's just be clear. The person you're describing, Kevin, I'm happy to have a conversation, but that's not why Paul Zelizer is on planet Earth right now. I'm not here to try to convince anybody. I go find the most dedicated, smartest, most motivated people and go resource them, join the conversation, amplify what they're doing. And when there's a conversation with somebody who's less engaged in making a positive impact, I'm happy to do my part, but I'm not on planet Earth to convince people. I just like, if we get the smartest people and we create these incredible companies that I get to amplify and talk to and consult with, like, I'm busy. People are knocking on my door. I'm not trying, like, going and trying to convert somebody who's not got this high in their priority. It's not high on my priority. I'll be totally honest with you. I just go communities of color, communities, marginalized communities, they know where we're at, right? And we're talking billions of people on planet Earth who are working really, really hard right now and are really concerned. And then there's some folks who aren't. And I'm only one human being. I can only do so much. I'm going to focus. If there's some way I can help somebody who's doing something for positive impact. And right now we're talking hundreds of millions of people. So I'm not going to run out of work anytime soon. I try to learn how to have that conversation without necessarily dismissing that person whose business as usual. But that's not my genius, honestly. My genius is go find the people who are doing the world-class impact work and go help them scale up, resource, tell their stories, connect with strategic partners. Like, I made that decision a long time ago. Life's short. I'm going to go where people doing the work.
That's great. And so thinking of those people that you are busy serving and supporting, who are some of the guests or that you found to be on your podcast, or people you worked with that you found to be especially inspiring, and why? What about them really inspires you?
Oh, goodness. Do you have hours? How many hours do we have? I'll give you three stories.
I'm sure it's an endless list, but
no. I'll give you three stories. Yeah, okay. 3 stories. So recently, it's not live yet. It's in the can. I had the absolute honor of interviewing Prashant, who's the CEO of a wonderful platform called Aikido Labs. It's an AI-based platform that is using a combination of high tech, about 50% of their workforce. And by the way, they have 750 employees, from concept to 750 employees in 6 years, I believe. About half of those are high tech and the other half are high touch. The population they're working with are marginally housed and homeless folks. And what they do, they're mostly on the West Coast. And what they do is, think of somebody who's unhoused. You're on the street, you fall over, you smack your head, need stitches, or you're in bad shape. You don't have medical insurance, but it's an emergency. They send out an ambulance, you go to the ER, they patch you back together, right? Do the math. In America, that's the 6-figure trip to the hospital when all is said and done, right? But you're unhoused, right? And then you go back to the streets. It gets infected. 2 weeks later, you're in urgent care. Multiply that out by a year, just one person of living that style. Hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of dollars in medical care. And you're still on the street living a very low quality life, right? So that's what Aikido Labs is working on. They use a combination of the high tech. Where are you? When we first made point of contact, you were in a shelter on this side of the city, but now you're on another side of the city. So let's change your follow-up medical care plan to another clinic, or let's get you a ride. Let's just make sure this happens. Do you need bus fare? They have mobile medical units that'll drive to where you are and do that care, right? So their funders are municipalities and hospitals who they're saving money, but they're also radically improving the quality of life of folks who are usually slipping through the cracks, right? And just an incredible amount of compassion, skillfulness. And from an enterprise perspective, it's the fastest growing impact brand that ever came out of the Y Combinator. They were from Y Combinator. And It's just a super great example of an awesome enterprise and impact at scale that really inspires me. So Prashant and his team at Aikido Labs would be one. Another one in the can that I'm super excited about, I just interviewed Gary McBarryhill from Raven Indigenous Capital. They've raised $300 million in Canadian, so it's about 220 US. And they're using those funds to distribute to Indigenous entrepreneurs all over North America. And they're looking at it from two lenses, which is super inspiring to me, especially as somebody who's worked in Indian country. I've worked on the Pueblos of northern New Mexico quite a bit in my time in community mental health. And they're looking at it from, is this a good business idea? How viable is this? But the other thing they're looking at is they call it, is this good medicine? So here you have a group that they're walking in both worlds, to use the language of some of my Pueblo mentors, right? They have a very clear sense and a strong financial grounding and looking at companies and doing their due diligence, but they're looking at it not just from a single bottom line. They're looking at it, how does this benefit Native communities holistically? What's this person's intent, not just for their own family, but for the larger community that they're part of? And I just love what they're doing. I immediately became huge fans. So that's company number 2. Let's see, what would be a good third example of somebody who's really, God, there's so many, but I'll do another one, a local New Mexico company. Y'all might have heard of Bioneers. Nina Simons is one of the co-founders of Bioneers. A shout out to Bioneers as just an awesome brand. The whole idea of Bioneers is biomimicry, like what's working in the realm of sustainability. They do an awesome conference. They've been at it for decades. I can't even remember, is it 35 years, 37 years, something like that? But just featuring some of the best solutions that work in tandem with nature and are mimicking nature, and they're helping folks from all over the world who have developed solutions to some of the sustainability issues that we're facing as humans. They're helping them get a platform. They literally do an awesome conference. So they get people on stage, help them amplify, connect, resource. And I got to interview Nina and just so appreciate the whole brand and her as a human, just a fabulous human. So those are 3 very distinct and diverse enterprises that I've gotten to kind of peek behind the curtain and help people learn about.
Great examples. Yeah. You have the amazing health outcomes and cost reductions and this attempt to reduce a tremendous amount of harm in the business as usual approach to kind of triage healthcare for those who need it most, need the support with Aikido Labs, and then Raven organizing capital to invest very intentionally into Indigenous-led enterprises, which have been categorically excluded from most capital. So redressing some of the long-standing and continued exploitation and exclusion. And then Bioneers. Yeah, what a great example. Kenny and Nina have been at it for a long time, really pathfinding, trailblazing ways for us to see new possibilities, really helped to animate my imagination of what's possible. What a wonderful event, and all the media that they've created over so many years. Great examples of inspiring organizations that you have the privilege to work with and communicate with. I'm curious, when you talk to the social entrepreneurs and impact leaders that you coach, what are some of the common barriers and challenges that you find that they face? If you want to just bridge from there, or I can ask it as a second question, what are the novels or what are the strategies that you see that they use to kind of overcome the challenges that they encounter?
It's a great question, Kevin. What I think is the pathways to social entrepreneurship are many. So I don't think we can say it's like one size fits all, but I do think there's maybe 2 buckets and the challenges tend to be different. So there's the folks like myself who don't come from a robust business or tech background. Again, I come from community mental health. I'm an organizer and somebody's thinking about wellness and trying to help people figure out how to navigate in a personal or family level some of the larger structural issues that we've been touching on today. And for us, it's about recognizing what we don't know. It's hard to know what you don't know when you don't know it. Right. So I don't have an MBA. I don't have formal training in business. And one of the big parts, the solution part there, Kevin, I'll just go like problem, solution, right? So one of the things for me and a lot of my clients who come from less developed or less formal business backgrounds is to realize it's not a gene, right? It's not like my DNA is broken because I don't have an MBA or I'm not a lawyer or I don't have like a lot of tech knowledge about how to do a tech startup. It's learnable skills, right? And so if I could turn down the volume of it, I don't have an MBA, I don't know anything about marketing, right? What do I know about accounting or booking? It's all learnable skills. Relax, take a deep breath, and you either like can hire it out or learn it, right? So just chill and don't get either A, what I sometimes see with folks on that side of this continuum is either get really resistant or go into like shame patterns about what we don't know and then don't tend to it. So classic that a social enterprise wouldn't take care of their books or their money very skillfully, right? Can't do a conversation about metrics, for instance. Those are skills, like just acknowledge it. I didn't get that training. So for me, pretty early on, when I wanted to get in the social enterprise, I realized I had to get some help with marketing. And now I teach it. And I've like been on the marketing team for a large tech conference in Silicon Valley, right? It's not a DNA thing. It's a learnable skill. And either figure it out if you're going to learn it yourself or figure out how to get somebody on your team, either through equity or hire them. Some way you need these skills and figure out how to get it done and stop wasting energy in shame or denial or pretending or keeping yourself small because you don't want anybody to know that these are certain things that you're not so familiar with. Just acknowledge it, talk to people who do know these things, help them, help sequence it out. For instance, pretty early on, I recommend my clients get a bookkeeper and potentially an accountant. That's one of the first people I suggest they contract with because it's just nice to have. I love my bookkeeper. I'm so grateful for her. She takes care of it. I don't need to worry about it. I don't need to be spending time on categorizing which category an expense goes into. So things like that, right? So that's a little bit more on that side, is to just be honest about what you don't know and talk to people who have some more knowledge and some of the more technical skill sets, and then be willing to skill up or hire out without a lot of drama. Just do it, right? Just get it done. Figure out how to get it done. Right. And oftentimes it's going to cost a lot less, or the learning curve is a lot shorter than your fear is telling you. But if you let fear drive the game, we get really messy social enterprises. And there's enough. The world's full of messy social enterprise. Don't be another one. Right. So that's a little bit more on that side of things. And also what I, on that side of things, encourage people to do, many of us on that side have a more lived experience. And also, we have more emotional intelligence. So what we don't know is some of these business hard skills, but what we do know, we know the communities that are affected by this. I literally have a master's degree in counseling psychology. The amount of training and knowledge I have in the emotional intelligence is like literally much more than most humans, right? And research tells us that emotional intelligence is much more effective in terms of actually moving the needle on providing value in a business context than IQ. EQ provides more long-term financial benefits, people with higher EQ, to the teams and companies they work with. A good resource for this is a book called Search Inside Yourself. It's an emotional intelligence program that Google's run tens of thousands of people through. It's Google. They do incredible research. So check out the book, Search Inside Yourself, and you can learn about emotional intelligence in business. But what I didn't know when I got started is that my not so formal business training was clear to me, but my skill sets around understanding the communities that were suffering from some of these really hard challenges, I knew those communities well. Had a lot of embodied experience working and living in small communities in New Mexico and southern Colorado. that look like some of the marginalized communities that a lot of social enterprises want to help. These are my friends. I knew their kids. This is who my kid went to school with. We played volleyball teams together, right? And I had a master's degree in counseling. So my emotional intelligence training was higher than your average person who had any level of training in business, right? And those skills are very valuable, but not usually very valued. Think about that. Very valuable, but not usually very valued. So that gives you some idea of like somebody who's on that end of the continuum. On the other end of the continuum, the people who have a lot of formal training in the skill sets that business tends to value a lot, an MBA, accounting, a lawyer, high-level coding skills, et cetera, you have really desirable skills that the business world tends to say is very valuable, tend to make higher than average incomes throughout your entire career. Like you can bring knowledge from the day you walk into a social enterprise, like work on climate, right? If you're a good coder and you know how to build things, you're a really good engineer, you can get a job at a startup in climate, even though you know nothing about climate. Right? That's not typically the way it works for somebody in many enterprises, right? But that's how it works when you have these high in demand skill sets. It's awesome, lean into it. The downside or the challenge there is number one, folks with those more formal training backgrounds tend to not understand or not listen very well to marginalized communities because our more formal training institutions don't oftentimes train people to listen very well. So it can be really easy to come in and say, oh, this is a technical problem. I know the answer. Here it is. And then why aren't these people implementing this totally obvious answer that I, as a very smart person with lots of formal training, told them to do? It's way more complicated than that in most social enterprises. Simple answers don't tend to work very well, and marginalized communities oftentimes have been burned around these issues over and over and over again. So somebody on that end of the continuum, their work is to learn about listening and building emotional intelligence and to get humble that you don't know as much in this space as what formal, if you went to Harvard Business School, your ability to practice emotional intelligence, listen, and be humble in a marginalized conversation with somebody from a marginalized community is probably not as high as you think it is. That's what the research tells us, right? And if you go listen to a marginalized community about the kind of experience they've had with a lot of those professions, it's pretty bad. So on that end of the continuum, it's working with people about listening, being part of teams, finding solutions together with the communities that are on the surface, the sort of place where the heat is and things are crumbling the most. But even in really intense, maybe even crisis situations, we got to listen or we're going to do more harm. And people with formal training oftentimes, especially when things are challenging, can get into what's oftentimes called the savior complex, and a lot of harm can come from that.
No doubt. Yeah, thanks, Paul, for if I could reflect some of the things I heard. Kind of some of the barriers are like coming in and not knowing what you don't know. So coming to an honest recognition of where there are skills that are learnable or maybe hireable, that even just acknowledging them and overcoming resistance or shame, to destigmatizing like, hey, you didn't have the training, you don't know it all, which for a lot of the social entrepreneurs and people we work with, it's even, there's a nuance there that I'm sure you're sensitive to, is even those who do have the training, like you just mentioned from, say, Harvard Business School or Stanford Business School or in any of the mainstream institutions, they might have some of the skills, but there's a whole new world of skills. Just somebody who understands finance doesn't necessarily understand integrated capital and regenerative finance or structured exits, things that can maintain community control, or don't understand how to practice democracy in an organization. So you might have leadership training, but you actually don't know how to facilitate dialogue and deliberation for non-hierarchical organizations. So these skills, there's skill gaps that are this idea of recognizing them and then learning them, or where possible, trying to hire somebody, but not hiring somebody that's going to bring in some of the business as usual practices that aren't in alignment with your values. It's a really tricky thing. And then I heard this also developing EQ and just in general, emotional intelligence, a really critical thing. We know both from business as usual metrics, work of Robert Keegan, somebody in Harvard, or ODDs, and just we know that being emotionally intelligent in an enterprise setting has impacts on productivity, and we've seen it being a critical success factor for raising capital or for developing reliable customer relationships, and certainly in all team building and work with others. So there's a skill transfer there and developing EQ. And then very poignantly, for those who are coming in with skills, they have some of the quote unquote hard skills from a business as usual institution. There's almost like an unlearning component to develop a deeper empathy for other communities or whoever you're intending to serve through a social enterprise that's trying to create change and transformation. There's a whole set of developing skills around empathy, how to communicate, but also that awareness, I think, is something that you mentioned, and we offered some resources. Those are really critical barriers that we definitely are sympathetic to seeing how those emerge, and I really appreciate you offering how you approach solutions and coaching people through. So does this become part of your coaching practice and methodologies that help social entrepreneurs and aspiring social entrepreneurs kind of?
Absolutely. Just honest assessment and just honest conversations like this, that like wherever we come from has both real strong assets. It's almost like if you're a sports player, right? You're on a sports team. If I'm not a basketball player, but if you're 7'2", you have some strengths in basketball, but you also probably don't move like somebody who's a point guard, like a really fast but much short. I don't know like what a point guard is these days, but let's call him 5'11". That's really short. So the 5'11" person who's super fast and could jump really high and shoot 3-pointers has both strengths and challenges that the 7'2" person who's right under the basket. Yeah, they're just very, very different organisms in the relationship of the context they find themselves, a basketball court. Well, the same thing. There's like some of us are really good. Some of us are really good at sprints and like can output really hard, but then we fall over. That's our work style. And other people are really good at like a sustained burn and can just like set something in motion and keep it going for years. There's so many different individual differences about our backgrounds and our work styles. I'm dyslexic. I'm really good at big picture visionary thinking, and I'm not the operations person. It's bad when you make me the operation person. I'm dyslexic, right? I can do it, but it's so much work, and it's like I burn a lot of extra calories, right? So we need to know ourselves in both formal skills, but also how we sustain and how we show up in the team. I ask my clients to do some really honest self-assessment, and then sometimes we can build certain skills. I understand the financial aspect of enterprise more than I did 16 years ago. And sometimes it's about partnership and building team with people who have the skills that we don't have. But if we don't know we don't have it or pretend we don't have it, we're setting ourselves up for some really significant challenges.
I totally see that. So I see your coaching practice really is helping people with wholeness, understanding this assessment of where there might be gaps and opportunities for growth and development. And you also mentioned very importantly that invitation to humility for maybe white identified people or dominant culture identified people coming in to try and be helpful. Oftentimes that can be very clumsy and very harmful. So just this invitation to taking a more whole, humble, empathetic perspective while addressing these skill and experience gaps, because we all come with diverse lived experiences and skills coming to our calling or our vocation to social enterprise. And what a huge need to service, to help people see that. And I can see how your background and all the skills that you've developed over time kind of help you provide that type of coaching and support. Paul, I'm curious if there's anything that you want to share with Next Economy Now listeners, that things you're tracking that you're excited about. I mean, you already shared some incredible examples of things that you're inspired by. But are there any resources or things that are coming up for you that you think would be valuable for the Next Economy Now listeners to know about, or just something that's alive in you?
Sure. Yeah, I just had a meeting today. Super excited about it. I like to joke, Kevin. I like to joke, period, like full stop. But I like to joke about, hi, my name's Paul and I'm podcast obsessed. I think podcasting is just such an incredible opportunity. It's the most relational form of mass communication the world has ever seen, in my opinion. And I can give you a little example of that. Listeners, think about how most of us listen to podcasts, right? Think of an earbud. You put an earbud in your ears. What are you doing? You're literally putting somebody into your body. You're literally inviting them into the space between your ears. That's a very intimate thing. Thank you for the invitation to be in your space in this way. It's really powerful. And again, remember, I'm granular, right? Some of the research we've seen in 2022, folks who do podcast marketing research, advertising research, they found that podcasts advertising is 3 to 5x more effective than other forms of media advertising, right? So YouTube video, you have 1,000 people watching it. A blog post, you have 1,000 page views. A podcast, you have 1,000 downloads. That podcast is 3 to 5x more likely to lead to a sale. Why? Well, what they're thinking is the best thinking of, at least in 2022, we're still unpacking, what's true in 2023, is that podcasting is really intimate. It's also, we tend to have much more sustainable listeners. People come back to podcasts, like you hit that subscribe button. I have my favorite podcast, right? It was fun to put you all, Kevin, on the list, right? I'm now a subscriber, right? So it's fun to be learning in this way. And plus, I'm a trail runner. So you go out on a run and you listen to your episodes. And then you're like, okay, I did enough podcasts. And now I listen to music. Anyway, so with 4 other impact podcasters, we are starting an impact podcast network. We just met today. It's really alive for me. I'm super excited about it, super fresh. So I can't say a whole lot about it because it's not ready. It's not live yet. But I can say, I love podcasting, and especially in the impact space. It's just such an incredible gift and opportunity to have a deep dive. Thank you for having me here, Kevin. And I'm so grateful that I don't have to turn this conversation into a 14-word meme for Instagram or like a TikTok video where you have 45 seconds. Yes, you can do it, but I thank God I don't have to do it because there's nuances and histories and it's so complicated, right? To really unpack the kind of work that you do, listeners, Kevin, that you do, that I do, to go deep. And, the average podcast episode is 23 minutes long in 2022, but I do 45, 50, 55-minute episodes, just like you all do. It's not hard to find. If you want to go even deeper than that, it's not hard to find the venue. And it's more effective in making sales, and it just fits the impact space. So for all those reasons, I love podcasting. So I just want to let people know, whether you're thinking of launching or growing your own podcast, or you're somebody who wants to think about being a guest like I am today. Usually I'm in your seat, Kevin, right? But either side of the mic, there's a ton of research that this is a very powerful way to get your message out there and move the needle on your sales, whether it's product or service in the impact space. So we've got an impact network coming. I'm super excited about it. But in the meantime, if anybody wants some help on either side of the mic, my podcast is called Awarepreneurs, and Awarepreneurs has an impact podcast group called the Podcast Success Team. So feel free to reach out about that and we can get you information. It's affordable. It's just such a fun and effective way to grow an impact business or a venture.
Thanks for that, Paul. Yeah, if we take sales as a proxy for trust, and trust being a part of relationship, podcasting is this very intimate, I hear this relational outcome that you're suggesting from your experience and the research. And thanks for sharing about that. I'm excited to learn more as it emerges, and I'm glad you're excited about it. And I wanted to just take a moment just to thank you, Paul, for taking time to be on Next Economy Now and share about what's inspiring you, about what you're seeing out there as the barriers and opportunities for social entrepreneurs that you coach and the impact leaders that you coach, and how you go about it, and then what you're bringing to them, and being part of this world for a long time, for a number of years here. Really appreciate your leadership and all the skillfulness, how you've navigated this space and brought people along. Is there any last words you want to share before we wrap this episode up?
Yeah, I just want to celebrate you, Kevin, and the Next Economy Now team. I know what it takes to keep a podcast up and running, and like a good one with good guests that deliver meaning week after week after week. So just a bow to you and thank you for what you've contributed all these years as well to the impact space. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul, and have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Before you go, we wanted to let you know that our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 26th. If you're an entrepreneur seeking to create a business that works for all life, a member of a team looking to transition your organization into one that is more regenerative and democratic, or someone who's considering a career or livelihood transition and embodiment with your values, we designed this course for you. Over this 9-month learning journey, you'll have the chance to learn practical skills around business and life design based on our work with over 250 social enterprises. In addition to live sessions, you can deepen your experience and practice with special sessions, affinity groups, and connections with over 500 alumni who have participated in the course. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro with one of our facilitators. If you're ready to sign up, you can use the code PODCASTMBA to save 10% on tuition. We hope you'll join us.